I left this house swearing I'd never come back. And yet, here I am, holding the keys to a door I spent half my life trying to close. The sky was steel gray, and the wind carried the scent of pine and distant rain as I pulled up to the old house. Gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped out, suitcase in one hand, keys in the other. The porch creaked with familiarity, the same way it did when I used to sneak out as a teenager. It hadn't changed. Same flaking white paint. Same leaning porch swing. Same rusted mailbox hanging on by a single screw. Everything looked exactly how I remembered it, and nothing felt the same. My father died 3 days ago. Massive heart attack. In his sleep. I got the call from Mrs. Keller, the neighbor who still lived next door and kept her eyes on everyone through that kitchen window like a quiet sentry. She said he hadn't been to the mailbox in 2 days. That wasn't like him. Nothing about him was spontaneous. Not even dying, I imagined. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. Before that, it was sporadic, birthday texts, awkward 5-minute calls at Christmas. We hadn't seen each other in person since Mom's funeral, and that had been nearly 15 years ago. Still, here I was, his only child, back in the town I'd spent my whole adult life avoiding. My plan was simple: sort the house, sell what I could, and get out. I had a job in Chicago, a fast-paced marketing career, a condo overlooking the river, a 6-year-old son I adored, and zero time for ghosts. And yet, as I stepped through the front door, something shifted in me. The house smelled like dust and wood and faint traces of Dad's old aftershave. Aqua Velva. He used it for decades. I remember catching that scent in the hallway when I was a kid, lingering long after he'd gone to work. The furniture hadn't moved. The brown recliner still angled toward the TV. Mom's floral curtains still hung in the living room window. There was even a yellowed newspaper on the coffee table from the week before. Frozen in time. I walked the room slowly, fingers brushing across old picture frames and chipped banisters. The hallway still had our old growth chart carved into the molding, dates, ages, my name in careful block letters. I ran my hand over the grooves and felt a lump catch in my throat. In my childhood bedroom, the bed frame was gone, but the wallpaper remained. Faded blue rockets and stars. I was obsessed with space once. I wanted to be an astronaut. Dad never said much about that. When I told him I wanted to study English instead of science, he looked at me like I'd confessed to joining a cult. Still, he paid for college. Without a word. Just mailed the check. That was his way. I ended up back in the living room, staring at something in the corner I hadn't noticed before. The old wooden chair. It looked smaller now. Weathered. The cushion sunken from years of use. One of the arms had a crack in it, worn smooth where his hand used to rest. That was his chair. Every night after dinner he sat there, newspaper in hand, legs crossed, eyes rarely meeting mine. I used to sit on the floor near him, pretending to play while secretly hoping he'd ask about my day. Most times he didn't. I sat in the chair. It creaked beneath me, and suddenly I was 7 again, cross-legged on the carpet, listening to the crinkle of the newspaper and the faint whir of the ceiling fan. I remembered the smell of his pipe tobacco, the way he cleared his throat before speaking. I remembered silence, lots of silence, and how I learned to fill it with my own imagination. That chair, it held so much more than a man's weight. It held years of words unsaid. I slept that night on an air mattress in my old room, wrapped in Dad's old flannel blanket. I couldn't bring myself to change into pajamas. I just lay there in my clothes, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything I ever wished he'd said, and everything I never said back. The morning sun filtered through the blinds in slats of pale gold, brushing the floorboards like memory itself. I moved through the house like a man caught between past and present, not ready to leave either behind. I made coffee in the same dented tin kettle Dad used for years. The taste was bitter and oddly comforting. Back in the living room, I found myself drawn to the wooden chair again. It had become a magnet. It wasn't just furniture anymore. It was a monument to something unspoken between us. I sat in it again. It groaned, just like before. But this time it welcomed me. I closed my eyes and tried to remember his face. not the stern mask I always saw, but something softer. Kinda. Did that version ever exist? A flash came, me at 8 years old, racing down the gravel driveway, knees skinned from falling off my bike. I was crying, blood dripping from my leg. I expected a lecture. I got silence. He crouched, inspected the wound, and disappeared inside. When he returned, he had a cold rag, a bandage, and a new set of training wheels. He didn't say a word, but I wrote again the next day. That was him. Silent gestures that said everything he didn't know how to verbalize. I opened my eyes and looked at the chair differently now. It had seen me grow. It had seen him fade. It had absorbed everything we never said. My foot nudged something under the chair. A soft thunk. I leaned down and saw a panel, thin, wooden, and almost invisible against the base. My fingers traced the edge. It gave slightly. Hidden compartment. I pried it open gently. Inside was a single envelope, aged yellow with time. My name was written across the front in his familiar handwriting. Ethan. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room was silent. So silent, I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I sat upright, envelope trembling in my hands. It wasn't dated. I stared at it for a long time before I dared to open it. The paper inside was lined. Blue ink. His penmanship was sharp, deliberate, like he wrote it slowly, thinking through every word. The first line made my heart stutter. If you're reading this, then I didn't get the chance to say these things in person. That's on me. I blinked. My throat closed. I know I was hard to read, maybe even harder to love. But I hope you'll read this and understand I tried, son. I really did. The chair, the room, the house, everything blurred around me. The man I thought I knew was unraveling, word by word. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to run from this house. I wanted to stay. I wanted to know more. You probably thought I wasn't watching. But I was. I always was. That single line in my father's letter shifted the ground beneath my feet. I sat frozen in the chair, his chair, now mine too, holding the letter like it might vanish if I let go. The words danced in front of me, sharp and raw and more honest than anything he'd ever spoken out loud. I know I failed in some ways, probably more than I realize. I didn't know how to talk about feelings. That wasn't something we did growing up. But I need you to know, son. I saw you. I was proud of you. Every single day. I let the tears fall this time. I didn't care. No one was watching. The letter had broken something in me, a wall I'd built long ago to keep the hurt out. But now it let something else in: clarity, forgiveness, maybe even peace. The next paragraph felt like he was writing it from just across the room. Remember that summer when you broke your wrist falling out of the oak tree? You tried to hide it, said it didn't hurt. You were 10. So stubborn. I wanted to scold you, but I saw your eyes. And I saw myself. I remember carrying you into the ER, watching you wince and pretending to be brave. I never told you, but I cried in the car on the way home. I didn't want you to see me that way. I closed my eyes and pictured it, his hand gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white, staring out at the road while trying not to break. I had no idea. At the time, I thought he was just irritated. He wasn't cold. He was just afraid to be warm. The letter went on. You're a good man, Ethan. A better father than I was. I've seen pictures of Liam. You have your mother's softness, and I see it in how you look at him. I hope he grows up knowing what it feels like to be heard. I choked back a sob. He did see me, even from a distance, even in silence, maybe especially in silence. There's a shoebox in the hallway closet. It's marked E.T., that's for you. If you're holding this letter, you're ready for it. I stood immediately and walked to the hallway, heart racing. The closet door creaked open like it hadn't been touched in years. I reached up to the top shelf and felt it, a dusty cardboard shoebox, lighter than I expected but heavy with meaning. I carried it to the couch, sat down, and opened the lid. Inside was a lifetime of fragments, a stack of newspaper clippings from my high school days, articles I wrote for the school paper, some even with my photo, my college graduation program with my name circled in red ink. A printed out email I'd sent one Thanksgiving apologizing for not visiting. He'd highlighted the line, "I've been so swamped with work, but I think about home more than you know." A Father's Day card from when I was 12, complete with a hand-drawn cartoon of us grilling burgers. I remembered being disappointed when he didn't laugh at the joke on the back. Apparently, he'd been laughing quietly all along. At the bottom was a photograph I hadn't seen in decades, me age 5, sitting in his lap on this very chair, holding a picture book. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at me. His eyes were soft, full of something I'd mistaken for distance all my life. It was love. I held the photo to my chest and wept. And then I noticed something else, tucked in the back of the box. His harmonica. I hadn't seen it since I was a kid. He used to play it out on the porch at sunset. Not melodies, just soft bluesy hums, like he was exhaling feelings he didn't know how to name. Without thinking, I raised it to my lips. The first breath squeaked, awkward and rusty. But then I found a note, then another. And suddenly, the air filled with a sound I hadn't heard in over 20 years, a sound that belonged to him and now. To me, it wasn't just a song. It was a bridge. Across time. Across silence. Across a lifetime of missed words. I stayed 2 more days. Not because I had to. Because I needed to. I walked the house differently now. Each room told a story I hadn't heard the first time. Each crack in the floor, each creak of the doorframe whispered memories I had overlooked, because I was too angry, too young, or too convinced I'd been alone. On the final morning, I walked the property one last time. The oak tree out back was still standing, sturdy and stubborn, its thick arms reaching for the sky. I ran my fingers over the bark and smiled. I remembered the fall, and the way he carried me in his arms. Before I left, I placed the letter back in the chair, tucked beneath the cushion. I wanted the next person who sat there to feel something. Maybe Liam, one day, when he's old enough. The chair didn't belong to my father anymore. It didn't belong to me either. It belonged to the story. I hired movers to bring a few things back to Chicago. The harmonica, the photo of us in the chair, a small stack of books my dad once read over and over, and of course the chair itself. It now sits in the corner of my apartment, bathed in morning light, surrounded by shelves of my son's picture books and a small potted plant Liam insists on watering daily. The first time he saw the chair, his eyes lit up. "Can I sit in it?" he asked, already halfway there. I nodded. "You don't have to ask. It's yours too." He curled up with a blanket, feet too short to touch the floor, and whispered, "Tell me about Grandpa." So I did. I told him about a quiet man who used to play the harmonica at sunset. A man who didn't say much, but watched everything. A man who loved deeply in the only way he knew how. And then I told him the story of the chair, of the letter, of the house, of the boy who finally heard his father after all those years of silence. And as I spoke, I realized something I hadn't before. This story, our story, wasn't about regret. It was about redemption. About opening a door you thought was sealed shut, only to find that love had been waiting there all along. I don't know if I'll ever sell the house. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. But no matter what happens, that chair will always stay with us. Because in the end, it's not just a piece of wood. It's a place where silence turned into understanding, where distance became closeness, where a man became a father, and where a son finally came home. If you've made it this far, maybe there's someone you're thinking about, too. A parent, a sibling, a child, someone you haven't spoken to in too long, someone who never said the words, but showed you in other ways, or maybe someone you're still waiting to understand. This story wasn't just about a chair. It was about how love sometimes comes wrapped in silence, how we often don't see it until we slow down long enough to listen, and how, even when it feels too late, it rarely is. So if there's a letter you haven't written, write it. If there's a call you've been putting off, make it. If there's forgiveness to give, offer it, whether they ask or not. Because in the end, it's not the big speeches or perfect moments that stay with us. It's the quiet ones, the ones that seem ordinary at the time, but echo forever.